Okay, let's go through the process of fitting an external DuraLock to a golf club. Here's one that was done earlier, and oddly this is actually a steel shaft and a graphite shaft. Quite an interesting effect. And there we go, ready to play. So let's just talk about the things that need to be considered here in fitting one of these. Well, first of all, not all shafts are the same. Some are more convenient. Generally speaking, graphite shafts are easier. Generally speaking, any shaft that doesn't have a grip on and doesn't have a head on is easier. But you can fit to anything. You just need to take care, and my purpose today is to show a few little tips as to how to do this more reliably and faster. So first of all, the DuraLock connector has an internal diameter, and I have measured the internal diameter of this one and found it to be 12.85 in there. I measured the top end because that is the most critical one, because the diameter of the shaft is greater there. So being 12.85, I subtract 0.35, a third of a millimeter. That is my cut distance for all these shafts, and I need to find out where that is in each case. So if we have a look at maybe a graphite one to start with. So here, it's easy to find it with a graphite shaft because you've just got to tape it. You're always going to find the distance somewhere in there. So I need 12 point, whoops, turn it on, 0, 0, there you go, zeroed, 12.5. So this is 12.5. Much better for these darker shafts to use a pen like this. So there's my cut position. So previously I measured the cut position for this one, which is actually the same shaft as that one there, and that was the cut position. And then I've sanded it back about 20 millimeters and I've fitted the O-rings. And you can see I'm ready to lay that out and glue it. But first of all, let's just talk about some of the considerations with the various golf shafts here. If you have a steel shaft, there's usually a step as we go down. You've basically just got to be aware that there are situations where sometimes the reduction in diameter as you go down with the step will require you to use a brass shim. This actually can happen with a graphite shaft depending on the taper, but it's more something you'll find with a steel shaft. And particularly if you want to have the finished length of the golf club the same as it started, in which case you'll be cutting out 17 millimeters. So let me just explain that for a moment. There is a distance between that end of the bore there and that end of the bore there of around about 17 millimeters. So if you want to finish up with the same length, in that scenario, what you'd be doing is you'd be finding your position to cut, which we did on this one here a moment ago, there. And this is our cut position. You would measure 17 millimeters down and you would take that out. This part would fit to the upper DuraLock and this part to the lower one. By doing so, you're now fitting the lower one to a smaller diameter, and you may find you need to use a shim. if you do use a shim, please be aware you've got to make sure that it's not too long. See, this shim needs a bit of a trim because that would be showing once it's all glued in. So I'd be cutting 5 millimeters off the end of that. Once again, if you find things just a bit too sloppy, use a shim or use some centering sand or beads here, and that just helps lay things out beautifully. Okay, so having cut the shaft, prepared it, sanded it in the normal way, you can use the normal glues that are used at the bottom to hold on the head and the normal accessories here. What you don't want to do is you don't want to glue it up and stand things vertically. It really will not work. It's a no-no. What you've got to do is find a way to lay everything out horizontally. So, if you were wanting to fit to this golf club, which does not have a removable head and does have a grip on it, even quite a chunky grip, the way to do that is to lay it out over the corner of a table so that you would have it sitting on O-rings with the DuraLock in the middle in this scenario here, like that. And that way the head is off the table and the grip is off the table, and we're just working with the area that we care about in this time, which is the 4 O-rings, which are vaulting everything off the table. So these are determining things, aligning things in this plane here vertically. But we need to take really a lot of care in total alignment. We can't have a club that is just aligned in one plane. It needs to be aligned everywhere. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do that. The simplest way is not the best way, but it's the way that people will be able to use something that is always to hand, and that is to use a ruler and basically just lay things out like so. DuraLock tightened up, epoxy sanded back as per normal, in there, off the table if needed for having the head and grip on, like so. And you'd roll this up against the steel rule and put a weight on here and leave it overnight. Now it's tempting to think that's a perfectly satisfactory way, and it does work. I've done this many times and it does work, but there are better ways, and I'll show you a better way than a steel rule. The next way is to use something that has a really defined straight edge. Now, it doesn't have to be these heavy bits of aluminium. It could be, for example, a bit of wood with a perfectly straight edge, and it could be a bit of aluminium like so. So what you do now, this is doing effectively what the steel rule does, but it's doing it on both sides. So now you'd lay it out with your glue and epoxy all done. Hold it like that. O-ring, 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 O-ring. Now, in this situation and in all situations, you still always have to make sure there's a little bit of weight in the middle here. You can see there that the weight even of this shaft is wanting this to flick up in the middle. So as the epoxy is going off, you always want to have, in this situation, held in. So you could even clamp it if you wanted to, push down. So just taping that down wouldn't be enough. I would put a spanner or a hammer or something on there just overnight while the glue goes off. So this is definitely an improvement over a steel rule or just a visual alignment, but the next way is probably better. Now, all hardware shops will have available aluminium angle. You can usually buy it in 3 foot or 900 millimeter lengths. Spend $10 or something like that. And using just a bit of regular duct tape, I've created a hinge. And this was obviously, broadly speaking, 300 millimeters and an offcut. So this might have been, an 800 millimeter bit to start with, I suppose. And this offcut I'm going to put downwards, rest that on top. Now you can see that holds it beautifully. I've got a layout arrangement here for 2 clubs, and all I would do here is lay it in there, O-rings inside, so that we've got O-rings on the angle all the way along. 1, 2, 3, 4. I would still want to put a weight in there. You see, I still need a weight. Otherwise, I've got to make sure that this doesn't fall down. But a little weight on there will do the job. And then leave that overnight, and I could be doing another one in here as well and have a number of them across the bench, should I wish to. So that is really the easiest way to do it, because you're always going to get everything aligned beautifully. All you need to do is have that weight on there, and everything will finish up beautifully aligned. Unless you don't have these tightened up to start with. That would be a bit of a no-no. You definitely want to have that hand tight, nice and firm there to start with.